Thank you, Beth. That's very kind. I really appreciate it. And great to see all these new faces and friendly faces and old friends. So thank you so much. And I guess Colette, I just saw she was on the front page of the paper today. I guess she was an alien abduction. Let's just leave it at that. And here she is. Here she is. She's somewhere out in the ethos. Unlawful taking by aliens. And I noticed Front Street kind of looks like lunar habitat. That would be a good space for some research techniques. And it's great to have the snow up here. Man, so fun the last couple of days. Anything goes when it's snowy, I noticed. So thank you. And it's great to have such a turnout. I feel like in many ways I come to learn from others about how intelligent and amazing these animals are, right? Because there's a ton we don't know about them. We know that humpback whales make an incredible diversity of sounds. They sing, they make social chatter, they make these feeding calls when they're coming up through the bubble net. But for the most part, we are still in the dark about the function of these sounds, what they mean, who the target is. So any ideas? I'd love to hear about it. And thanks again for getting us set up here. And I guess one of the coolest things about these whales is that there's lots of them now. And that is, I mean, it's brilliant, right? We owe a lot to the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act, global pieces of legislation, global models, and they have served us very well over the past 30 years. And a couple of years ago, the humpback whale was delisted over most of the planet, which is super exciting, right? Because it's like, what it means is that we still have, this is the data set taken from Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve, going up and up and up. Super cool. And what it means is that our oceans are still pretty healthy, that you can have a mid to upper level predator like a humpback whale show this dramatic recovery over the last several decades. So it's pretty cool. We still have a lot of ocean health. The humpbacks are finding places to raise their young, finding places to come up here and eat. So it's super exciting. And you know, one of the things that kicked off our consciousness about these animals, and probably a lot of you remember this albums that came out in the late 70s. Great stuff, right? It's like why don't we celebrate a couple of these amazing sounds? Anybody want to take a stab on what they're saying? Yeah, hello there, yeah. One of the things we know about the songs is that they're produced just like birds. They're produced in a reproductive context by males during the breeding season. Females don't sing. They make a ton of other sounds, especially the social chatter, but as far as we know, it's just the males. So that suggests that these sounds are associated with mate attraction, mate selection. There's also thoughts that these sounds, when the whales are singing in the subtropics, that they may use them to form coalition with other males or size other males up. So still lots of tons of great research that's going on around the song, but we're still trying to figure out what they're saying. We'll just play one more quick little clip here because it's so darn tootin' beautiful. We do hear a bit of song up here. This time of the year, if there's whales hanging around, they will do some singing. One of the really cool thing about humpback whale song is that typically it's anywhere from a 10 to 15 minute, what we call it a song cycle. It's just this recurring series of themes and motifs that a whale will sing. And the song gradually changes across the winter season. And when they swim up here, in April and May and June, and they wind up here in Alaska, the song, they start singing less, and the song starts to compress almost like a JPEG compression. It's like it gets shorter, it gets compact, a lot of the repetitive themes fall out of it, and it almost crystallizes once they get up here. And you'll occasionally hear a few phrases, but usually not until October they start to sing again, kind of like an origami. It opens back up and unfolds, and by the time they get to Hawaii, they're in full singing mode. So really remarkable. And there's a huge cultural component to these songs. It's Francis Garland's work in the Southern Oceans and Oceania. It's been shown that from the very large population center in Eastern Australia, new themes, new motifs start there, and it takes a couple of years for them to be picked up by other whales as it radiates across the Pacific. So we know these animals, basically they've had the internet long before we have, right? We're just catching up with our modern technological tools to their amazing communication sophistication. And having the whales recover is really, not only is it a gift to us and a gift to the whales, but it's a gift to the Earth, because they have been shown to be important ecosystem catalysts or keystone species. And what you occasionally see is up here, you'll notice in the water a pink thing, and that's whale poop. That's from this whale dining on krill. And the nutrients that are associated with their poop is extremely important for the oceans. Oftentimes, nitrogen and iron are limiting nutrients, and the whales can actually recycle these nutrients in the oceans very effectively. And so it's thought that, instead of these predators actually reducing prey in many areas, they may actually increase the primary productivity of the oceans, resulting in more fish and krill for all. Also, when a whale perishes and it sinks to the bottom, their skeleton can become an extremely important substrate for the same type of organisms that live on oceanic deep hot vents. So they can actually, almost like island biogeographical, their skeletons can act as stepping stones for these organisms that are sulfur reducers that grow on their skeletons. So all kinds of important ecosystem functions. And the whales that we have here, as I mentioned, here in Southeast Alaska, their predominant area is Hawaii. In fact, it's very unusual in that almost like 95% of our population goes directly to Hawaii. We have whales that come into Southeast Alaska from a variety of other populations, Mexico, perhaps as far south as Panama, a few come from Japan, but there's a bunch here that go directly to Hawaii back and forth, which is pretty interesting. Of course, humpback whales, they come in very specific flavors, easy to tell by their tails. Chuck and Virginia Duras pioneered the photo identification of these whales back in the 70s. Humpbacks are also known by their enormous pectoral flippers. Amazing bone structure. In fact, they got the longest middle finger in the known universe. Of course, up here feeding is amazing, right? These animals have all kinds of really cool feeding strategies. You see on the front end of this animal, those are sensory nodules. Those are repurposed hair follicles for sensing their environment. So just like the whiskers on your cat or your dog, these whiskers help them mechanically sense their environment. Each other, maybe the tail beat synchrony of each other, fish schools, density of krill in the water. That's a really cool thing about evolution. It does a lot of repurposing of pre-existing structures. Here we see an animal going up to feed, and when these whales feed, it's really cool. They take an entire chunk out of the ecosystem every time they feed. Hopefully that's prey-laden, and they have this huge, we talk about aliens, right? They've got this enormous mouth with baleen hanging down from the upper side, same stuff that your fingernails are made out of, engulfing in this large, distensible, trick-or-treat-like bag on their tummy, the buccal cavity. Once they engulf the prey, they close their mouth, start to force the water back out through the sides of their mouth, and thus retaining the prey on the inside. Pretty amazing. When they get together here and feed communally, in fact, Southeast Alaska is known worldwide for its remarkable social. These remarkable tonal-like sounds. There's been a number of theories about what their function is. Anybody want to hazard a guess? You got it. Very good. Does it help to confuse their prey? We think that prey manipulation, that was one of the first, when it was first discovered by Scott Baker and Cynthia DeVincent back in the early 80s. It's actually probably been known forever, right? But first known to science in the early 80s. And at that time it was proposed that there may be some sort of coordination signals of the whales in the group, or maybe some sort of like assertive or dominant signals, or, as you kindly mentioned, they may be associated with disorienting or hurting the prey. And over the last 20 years, we've actually been able to show and find more and more evidence for prey manipulation, that these whales are using these sounds to confuse and herd prey towards the surface. And one of the lines of evidence we have for that these are herding cries is that there's been a number of observations now of single whales using the sound on the prey. It's only known from when they're hunting on Pacific herring. Herring are hearing specialists. They can really, they have excellent hearing. You can talk to any herring fisherman, right? And we think that the whales have cracked the code and they're using these sounds to chase the prey up so they can more easily wrap them in the bubble net.
Just curious, what kind of evidence leads you to that direction rather than just they're saying charge or something like that?
Okay, the fact that solitary whales do it, suggesting that they wouldn't have any need for, a command and control signal for a solitary individual. Also, you occasionally will find large pods that can completely omit the feeding call. It doesn't happen very often, but you can see them hunt and feed without using the feeding call in pretty coordinated events. Also, some of the work that I did when I was in school was taking these sounds and playing them back to herring schools, both in the wild and in the lab, and was able to show that that herring can detect these sounds and it elicits a very strong fright reaction from the prey. So yeah, just a continual series of lines of evidence that suggests that they are an interspecies harassment sound is what they are, I guess.
So what is the harassment, the fright response?
Well, it's funny. The herring appear to be able to localize it. So the whale will, as far as we can tell using sonar, the whale will dive down below the school, start to vocalize, and that gets the fish moving up off the bottom and up towards the surface. And other whales will go off, and particularly one of them start to blow this spiral bubble net, and they all kind of work together in concert. And just like herring, if you ever watched a herring school, if you've ever dropped your fishing pole in the bottom of the boat and you see herring flipping at the surface, they just want to get down. They want to dive. They want to go down to the deeper, darker layers. This sound is so powerful and so loud, it seems to sort of overcome that and forces, as far as we can tell, the prey up towards the surface. And so, so they just turn and they just run like heck.
So does it cause them to run towards one another? Because normally when you think of a prey response, it's scatter.
Yeah.
Which would be counterproductive for the whale.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's funny because that's exactly what I had thought when I started playing back the sound to the fish schools. I thought it was going to cause them to ball up, but actually causes the school to the school envelope actually increases a little bit. But overall, it's really useful for getting them up to the surface. And once they push them against the surface, that causes the school to collapse, and the circular bubble net appears to contain the school from sneaking out to the sides. So they got big brains, enormous brains, and you can say they're quite a bit bigger than ours. We're about the size of an Indian River cantaloupe. These guys are Yuma River watermelons, and so huge cognition potential. Cytological studies that have looked at the brain structure of the humpback show that their brain is laced with spindle neurons, and we also have spindle neurons. So do elephants and dolphins. And a spindle neuron it's a large cell that it's actually kind of like the firewire of the mind, and it connects very different parts of the brain, and is thought to be associated with higher order reasoning. In humans, spindle neurons are associated with social intelligence, language acquisition, facial recognition, and compassion. All the fun stuff, right? And the humpback's mind is laced with these things. And it's really cool because you actually start to see these humpbacks engage in some pretty remarkable behavior. Compassion amongst them. A paper was recently published. It's got about 25 authors on it. They reported on the global observations of seeing humpback whales interfere with killer whales, sharks, and other predators when they're attacking another prey item. The humpback whales will come over. Here you see this humpback whale is diving towards this killer whale. This is out in Frederick Sound. They go out and they mess with predators and try to disrupt their activities. This remarkable photograph here, this was taken in the Southern Oceans by Bob Pittman, John Durbin. You can see this is a little baby seal that this humpback came over and ran the killer whales off, rolled over on its back, and let the seal crawl up on its tummy, right? There's even a report of humpback whales protecting an ocean sunfish from sharks. So pretty cool, compassionate. When you look and see the biological hardware that these animals have, it's remarkable, and it manifests in their really cool behaviors. Of course, breaching is one of them. Super frolicking animal, the humpback whale, probably more than most other large whales. And now that they're showing this remarkable recovery, one of the things that we want to do is just make sure that they're doing fine, right? If we want to continue to monitor their health, and most importantly, they've been showing this remarkable recovery, growing at approximately 5% a year for the last couple of decades. We want to make sure that continues. Also, there's been reports of some whales being kind of skinny lately. You can see their scapulars, and it's what we call back here. You see these little depressions. It's known as a slightly collapsed blowhole. The lice and parasite burden on the animals, skin condition. Maybe there's just a lot more whales now, and so statistically you're just going to see individuals that appear to be less healthy. But we want to continue to monitor that. Here we see a gray whale on the beach. And I know this guy's pants are more interesting than the whale, but this is Ken Balcom, fabulous researcher who's been into whale health for decades, particularly acoustic health of these animals. When an animal washes up on the beach, of course, that's a really important thing for us to go and monitor. We can learn a lot about how the whale lived and died. And of course, most importantly, we want to look for signs of human interaction. See if it was a ship strike, entanglement, pollutants, and then ideally, we can better inform our behavior so we can coexist peaceably with these animals. Of course, a big concern too is the overall health of our ocean and the ability of these animals to find sufficient food. So here's a whale that looks really large. Looks like it's got a really nice blubber layer on it. This animal was sleeping up at the surface. You can see how it's kind of buoyant it is. It's sort of up out of the water. So probably a pretty healthy looking individual. And what we want to be able to do is be able to assay or sample large numbers of individual in a minimally invasive, cost-effective manner to make sure that the animals are doing pretty well. And this is where we've teamed up with Ocean Alliance, Intel, Parley for the Oceans, and the University of Alaska to use drones to monitor the health of these animals. And they're really fabulous tools, right? You can approach the animals without producing a loud sound signature underneath the water. And you can do a variety of collections with these things. The first probably the most important collection is just, again, seeing if the animals appear healthy. And by getting above the animals and peering down, you can get some idea of their overall body girth. This is work that was being done by Mind's Eye Lab in the Hillsborough, Portland laboratory. And you can start to scale the animal and look how the ratio of the width to the length of the animal, and actually come up with a health indice. And this is one of these very rapid things you can actually do in the field, fly over multiple individuals and just quickly assess the overall health. Ideally, you sample the same individual a couple times during the season, and you also sample the same individual across multiple years and decades. And that's really instructive for getting idea about the health of a population. And that's why it's so cool to do work out here in Southeast Alaska. First of all, it's such a healthy area relative to most parts of the oceans. And also because we tend to see the same whales year after year in these bubble netting teams, they make a fabulous animals that we can follow their health over time and space. Another thing you can do is actually collect some of the spout of the animal, hence the name SnotBot. And by flying into the plume of these whales, just by velcroing a petri dish onto the underside of the aircraft, you can fly through and they'll spout and you can get these droplets. And those droplets have a wealth of information about these animals. You can look for stress hormones, reproductive hormones. So if it's a female, you can get some idea if she has a calf, has a fetus. DNA to find out what subpopulation they're from, contaminant burdens. So remarkable tools. The reproductive and stress hormones, we're collaborating with Shannon Atkinson and her graduate student, Kelly. And so it's been really fun, and we're hoping to get out there and continue this project indefinitely because it's a great way to minimally invasive sample these animals. So let there be spouts. Of course, the important thing is when you're sampling these animals is you don't want to contaminate the spouts. So you try to fly through one individual and stay upwind and try not there to be any extra drift. So it gets kind of exciting out there. We've also been able to sample a couple of killer whales with Scott Baker's lab, and we were able to show genetically that these killer whales were transients, and it matched up with tissue samples that were obtained through other means. So very exciting that all this can be contained within the spout of these animals. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to reflect on that. Also, getting the photo ID is really important too, because once you get the photo ID, then you can follow the same animal through time and space. And another project that the Intel Labs has been doing has been ways to quickly assess, just like a fingerprint, rapidly assess when you're in the field and figure out what individuals you're looking at. So it's pretty exciting. And they primarily use the trailing edge of the animal to assess individual distinctiveness. So it's pretty cool, because otherwise it's a pretty laborious, fun but laborious pattern of playing, matching the whale flukes. And a couple other things that we've been doing, it kind of gets back to this theme about SETI and deep space, and is our work out at Five Finger Lighthouse. This is in Frederick Sound. It's a fabulous area to watch whales. It's a solar-powered krill factory. 2 years ago, it was estimated that in about a 30-mile stretch, there was over 400 whales feeding on krill. So you can get these occasionally super dense concentrations of whales out there, and a great place to have this lighthouse centered out here. My colleague Andy Szabo, this is some work he did mapping the abundance of krill out there at Frederick Sound. The black dots represent whales, and the reddish and yellowish areas represent higher concentrations of krill and fish in the sound. We've also recently been collaborating with the folks at NOAA who build these weather satellites. Some of these satellites, they have sensors that can detect the abundance of chlorophyll in the water, which is super cool. Clark Snodgrass and his colleagues, this is one of their sensors, so you can actually see here, red areas, lots of the small green plants of the ocean, the chlorophyll, the green plants of the ocean. So pretty exciting to try to link this all together so we can become more predictive about how the whales are doing and if they're having any problems and if it's food related. But working at the lighthouse is a blast. The lighthouse is administered by the Juneau Lighthouse Association. Always looking for volunteers. It's a great place to come and hang out and spend the summer. This beautiful tower out in the middle of these waters, and fabulous sunsets and sunrises. Typically what we use is a surveyor's theodolite, where we'll have one of our interns or graduate students pinpointing the position of the whales. Other individuals help us spot, and when we see a whale surface, we can get an exact position on it. And then by using hydrophones, this is Michelle Fournet, she's one of our principal investigators out there, and by using hydrophones that float out there at the surface, we can actually get a signal that's beamed back to the lighthouse. This is one of our graduate students, Dawn Barlow, and she was one of our primary analysts of the sounds. And here you can see a little map of how this works. Whales out here, vocalizes, the sound goes up to our hydrophone anchored on a kayak. a wireless signal gets sent back to the lighthouse. Then we can go through and do all our processing. And if we can get a photo ID, we can start to do matching if we can individually find diagnostic cues within the sound. And then we can also wind up doing playbacks. With the speaker, we can play sound back to the whales and test idea about call function based on the whale's response. So it's a pretty exciting facility out there to do research. And just a couple examples. We heard a little bit of the sounds of the song, and we heard the feeding sounds when they're chasing the herring. This is also a very typical sounds that the whales make. It's kind of like a social chatter that they're making. Both males and females in all life history phases, in all areas, migration, breeding, and feeding, they'll make this social chatter. Kind of funny. That sounds like something in the Navy, doesn't it? That's a hooga. So to date, over 50 So Rebecca Dunlop and Michael Node and their colleagues in the Southern Oceans, they have been working on these sounds, and they've identified over 50 individual social sounds that these whales make. So the diversity of symbols that these animals have to communicate information is enormous, right? The ways they could string it together into very complex, potentially complex meaning. Each of the symbols themselves is also very complex. So they have lots of ways they could be potentially mapping information on these signals that we have not yet come close to figuring out yet. So we're just going to finish up here with a couple more things. My colleagues at the SETI Institute, Sean Hanser, Lawrence Doyle, they approached me about 15 years ago, and they said, you know, we've got these dishes, we're looking into deep space, trying to find signs of life out there. So far we haven't found anything. We're wondering that maybe we're actually missing the signals. They may actually be raining down upon us, but we don't have the sophistication yet to understand them. And they said, you know, humpbacks are one of the most diverse, craziest, otherworldly, complex vocalizers. Why don't we work together and try to analyze these signals jointly? So it's been a super fun collaboration working with them. And there's a lot of similarities between whales and deep space searches. You know, the first is that whales, you know, it's thought with blue whales before the advent of human noise in the water that a blue whale signal could propagate from pole to pole. It could travel through the oceans, huge distances. The sounds, they get into these layers down in the deep ocean. They bounce around between the salinity layers and the density layers. And so it's almost like they have their own telephone cables or internet. Also, these signals travel so far that by the time it arrives at a receiver, it's like the information may be actually not be really relevant anymore. Just like some of our closest stars are, 4 light years away? That's a long ways away. And so with these whales, so they're constantly having to deal with information that's having to make decisions about, should I approach this vocalizer or will it take me too long to get there? And also the whole idea is about how do you design a signal for long distance travel? How do you minimize the signal degradation? These are all issues that astrobiologists consider, and we also consider as whale biologists. So it's been a super fun collaboration. And of course, they're interested in looking at lots of different systems here on the planet, these SETI investigators, because many different types of communication systems have evolved on our planet. And by understanding these and the diversity, we'll be better to look for signs of life out in the deep space and in the oceans. And just to finish up with, a couple of the projects that we're also working on are disentanglement. And again, I want to thank the National Marine Fisheries Service and NOAA. They've been fabulous at providing us with tools for working on whale health and disentanglement, training, and permitting for us to go out and help these whales. And here we are working. This is one of our co-investigators, Don Holmes, and a couple of members of the Coast Guard. Coast Guard has also been great about providing their assets when there's an entangled individual and they need to go out on patrol, or they provide us access to remote areas, plus lots of training. So it's been a wonderful collaboration. And lots of interesting ways that we can think about helping whales, and so we can be better stewards of our oceans. Thank you very much.